The most oft-repeated defense of industrial agriculture is that it is needed to feed the world. People say, Andy, I love organic. You know, I know Center for Food Safety is, promoting organic. You know, we like organic too, don't get us wrong, but, forget it. You're not going to feed the world, with organic. It would take industrial agriculture. This is wrong in so many ways. One of it is that, as we've discussed, it is really important to know that industrial agriculture primarily sells commodity crops, not food crops. That's what makes its big money, not on food, but on commodities like corn and soy and cotton that they don't sell for food directly. They sell for gas, for other products, and et cetera. So, but the other thing is that there have been peer-reviewed studies by the United Nations, by Michigan State, by other universities and entities around the world that have said, you know what, the only way we're going to feed the world is through medium and small-sized farms that use organic or other sustainable methods. Because that's the only way we're going to get the diversity of foods that we need to feed the world. Even if we were eating that corn and soy that they make, which we're not, you cannot feed the world on corn and soy. You need a wide diversity of crops. That can only happen within the small scale and medium scale setting. So the peer-reviewed science that we have, not just good thinking, we love organic and isn't that nice, says that because of the massive overhead costs, because of the economies of scale that only allow industrial agriculture to have these massive monocultures, that's the only way that works, right? You cannot feed the world based on those huge monocultures, both because you need the diversity and because that kind of overhead would be impossible for a medium or small size farm. So we have the science, now we've got to get the policy. Anybody can look up the science and say, hey, the next person that tells you we need industrial agriculture to feed the world is being anti-science. That's an anti-science person. That is a science denier. We have the science. We know it's medium to small-sized organic and or sustainable agricultural farms. That is the future, or it will have to be the future if we're going to feed the world. We know through our loss of topsoil, through our loss of water supply. We know through the poisoning of our wildlife. I mean, 75% of all endangered species on our list are there because of farming and ranching. We know through the destructions of our great river systems. We know through what's happening in, childhood obesity and the epidemic of childhood cancers. We know, and through the brain damage that's happening through the toxins in our food, we know that our industrial food system has caused enormous environmental harm and is contributing tremendously to this climate chaos that threatens the biochemistry of the entire planet. We know it threatens our health and our children's health. So it's an environmental crisis and it's a health crisis. But I would also say to everyone out there, it's a moral crisis. It's a moral crisis for each of us. Because even though we're called consumers, like a fire consumes a house, we're not. Every decision that I make, that you make, that your community makes on the foods that we buy, the foods that we feed our children, the foods that we grow, is going to create a different food future. It's going to create either more of this environmental disaster, this horrifying health crisis, this criminal animal suffering. It's going to contribute to that. My choice, your choice, will contribute to that if you make the wrong choice. If you go to a fast food place, if you buy industrial food, that's what you're feeding. That is the monster you're feeding. So you're not a mere consumer. You are helping create that terrible world that we need to get rid of. Or you're going organic and beyond. You're either eliminating or massively reducing your meat consumption. You're going non-GMO. You're going, making the right choices, going local, appropriate scale. Those are the right choices. And that is then creating this new food future, the one that we need to have healthy people, to have a humane system, a socially just system, and a healthy planet. So this is not just, this is terrible and that's terrible. This is a moral crisis for each one of us. We have the choice, each one of us with our dollar, to vote every day for one future or the other future. And I think we all need to join together to make sure that we make the right choice to that local, appropriate scale, humane, socially just, biodiverse climate-friendly future that future generations are going to depend on. Years ago, when I was writing my book, The Human Body Shop, I had a chapter on genetic engineering, and I learned that the United States Department of Agriculture, with our taxpayer dollars, was funding research to take human growth genes and genetically engineer them into pigs. The idea was to create, and this is according to the researcher Vern Purcell at USDA who was doing this, pigs as big as a barn. Well, I wanted to see this experiment. What was this like? So I went out to Beltsville, Maryland, where this was being done, and visited Dr. Purcell and at this USDA station. And I said, can I see this pig? And I saw pig 6707. And yeah, they had gotten that human growth gene in every cell, genetically engineered it at an embryo stage, and got that in every cell of that pig. But the pig was a tragic comic, just a terribly tragic thing. I mean, it couldn't stand up. I had to put it up against a sort of plywood board to be able to photograph it. Musculature, because of this growth genes, had completely collapsed in on it and making it muscle bound, but it couldn't move. It was cross-eyed, bow-legged. It was just a terrible, terrible thing. And I said to Dr. Purcell, well, what happened here? And he said, well, the Wright brothers didn't get it correct the first time either. It took them several. And I realized that this is a terrible, kind of a cold evil. He wasn't, oh, I love to torture animals. But there was this view of life, of all life, as a machine that can be made more efficient through genetic engineering. And I think if you look at the terrible suffering of the 10 billion animals that we use every year in our factory farm system, if you look at the 10 million farmers that have been lost and the 5 million farms, if you look at the horror that's going on with our communities there, the destruction of our water supplies, the poisoning of our rivers and our air, the cancers among our population, among our children, these things. This is not being done by people who are like terrorists, people who are full of hot emotions. This is cold evil. I call it cold evil. You won't hear about it in your churches on Sunday, or you're unlikely to, or your synagogues, or your mosques. This is the cold evil of bottom line thinking that looks at competition, profit, and efficiency in the market overall. The entire biotic community, and now threatening the biochemistry of the entire planet through climate change, what I call climate chaos. That's a cold evil, and as people of conscience, we have to sort of add that to our lexicon now. Of course we don't want to see terrorists. Of course we hate to see crimes of violence in our streets. But that is not what is causing the greatest threat to us. It's the cold evil of these corporations and the technologies they use that are causing, again, the greatest challenge to our planet and to the massive suffering of the human population, the animal population, the plant population, the entire biotic community every day. And that is what we should be focusing on with our righteous moral outrage, is those folks that are giving this kind of cold, evil worldview and trying to have it win. Instead of what we know we want empathy, we want love, we want respect, we want to re-embed ourselves in the patterns of nature, and we want to make sure that we participate and we have within our empathetic circle all the living things on this earth and the planet itself. Two very different ways to proceed. And I think it's an important perspective to have as an overview as we look at all these issues. I feel that the mainstream media is pretty much ignoring the environmental crisis, the health crisis that our industrial agricultural system is giving us. And if you extend that, the crisis that our pharmaceutical industry is bringing us, that the bottom line of these corporations, the bottom line of this system is anti-nature, it's anti-health, and our physical health and our psychological health, and some might even say our spiritual health, is at risk. And we've reached a crisis point now. It has become so pervasive that we need voices. And a conference like this offers me and many others a chance to reach audiences out there, and the great work that's being done here. Through these interviews, through streaming, we have the opportunity through technology now to get this word out. And I certainly feel as the Executive Director of the Center for Food Safety, that it is my job to get the word out as often as I can. And I really am pleased and so always delighted to take part in conferences like this and any throughout this country that get this word out in this way. And what I like about a holistic conference, such as this one, is it's covering so many aspects of health. So not just the food issue, not just the pharmaceutical issue, but all these different aspects of the crises that people face and the choices that people are going to have to make every day about what happens to their children, about the food that's given, the pharmaceuticals that are given, that happens to their communities. This gives them the information to make those decisions. Otherwise, they're lost in information out there, and most of it false is being given by the big companies. So it's always a privilege to partake in conferences like this. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to speak. People often say to me, haven't we gone too far? Andrew, I know you do great work at the Center for Food Safety and so many other groups that you're allied with. You've got 1 million members and it feels good. But haven't we gone too far? Will we really be able to stop, the global warming crisis or, climate change? What about, this whole system, has it gone too far? Are you optimistic about change, the change that we all know we have to make? And I always say there's a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism says, I've looked at all the facts and I'm now very optimistic that this is going to be the outcome. Anybody that looks at our world right now and is optimistic, I don't think is looking at the facts correctly. But I'm very hopeful. And, I often ask this to audiences in my lectures. I say, can you find any single historian or anyone who predicted the Berlin Wall would come down? No one did. No one's able to ever show me one essay, even one historian anywhere that said, this is going to happen soon. We were hopeful, but not optimistic, and it happened. When Nelson Mandela, the great hero, when he was in prison, I don't think anybody was optimistic, that he was ever going to get out of prison, much less become the head of South Africa, much less that instead of being vengeful, start these reconciliation councils all across the country. That would have seemed bizarrely hopeful. Even a few years ago, I was not optimistic that we would see the massive growth of organic or the non-GMO movement. We were going to fight, but now I walk into an Exxon gas station and there's 4 different kinds of organic milk being sold. And you turn on the TV and there's a pet food advertising itself as non-GMO. I wasn't optimistic we would see that in such a short time. I was hopeful, but we've seen it. Right? I was not optimistic I would see a black president in my lifetime. Totally not optimistic. But I was hopeful, and it happened. So what I would say to people out there, don't worry about optimism, but stay hopeful, and don't worry about immediate success. We're not called necessarily to be successful. We're called to be faithful. We're saying we see the world in a certain way. We have spent lots of time and energy finding out the truth about our foods, about the pharmaceuticals, about what's going on in our world, with energy, what's going on. We know that, so we're going to stay faithful to that truth. Whether it's success in the short term, don't worry about that. We're going to stay faithful to that, and we're going to act in a manner that merits victory, even if we don't always have immediate victory. And we're going to say to ourselves, A, we're going to stay faithful, and B, we're going to stay hopeful. And if you do, and I've been doing this for decades, I'm not burned out, I'm not cynical, I'm not pessimistic even. I'm hopeful, and I'm faithful in our combined work. And I think that's the key to remaining active and to keeping the good fight going. Say, keep the faith. It's a good motto.